Given what Secretary Hegseth said this morning, is it the position of this administration that the press should not prominently cover the deaths of U.S. service members?
No, it's the position of this administration that the press in this room and the press across the country should accurately report on the success of Operation Epic Fury and the damage it is doing to the rogue Iranian regime that has threatened the lives of every single American in this room. If the Iranian regime had their choice, they would kill every single person in this room. And so we can all be very grateful that we have an administration and that we have men and women in our armed forces who are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the rest of us in this room and for every American across the country and for every troop that is based in the Middle East. That's what these...
Secretary Hegseth was complaining that it was front page news about these 6 service members who were killed.
That's not what the Secretary said, Caitlin, and that's not what the Secretary meant, and you know it. You know you are being disingenuous. There is not... We've never had a Secretary of Defense who cares more.
Drones get through or tragic things happen. It's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad.
Yeah,
as you know, we cover the deaths of U.S. service members under every president.
The press does only want to make the president look bad. That's a fact. Especially you. No, listen to me. Especially you and especially CNN. And the Secretary of Defense cares deeply about our war fighters and our men and women in uniform. He travels all across this country to meet with them, to connect with them, and your network has hardly ever probably reported on that. You also had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Chairman Kane, who's a brave patriot, standing alongside the Secretary at the Pentagon this morning, again expressing his condolences to these families. And I just told you that the President of the United States will be attending their dignified transfer. So please,
that's not making the president look bad. That's showcasing that.
We expect you to cover that as you should. We expect you to cover that as you should, Caitlin. But you and your network know that you take every single thing this administration says and tries to use it to make the president look bad. That is an objectable fact.
I don't think covering troop deaths is trying to make
if you're trying to argue right now that CNN's overwhelming coverage is not negative of President Donald Trump, I think the American people would tend to agree, and your ratings would tend to disagree with that as well. Go ahead. Extend our prayers and condolences to the families of the 6 U.S. military service members who have been lost in Operation Epic Fury. These heroes represent the very best among us. They laid down their lives in defense of our country, and we will never forget their legacy or their sacrifice. As the president said, we grieve for these American patriots and their families as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. President Trump intends to attend the dignified transfer of these American heroes to stand in grief alongside their families. The rogue Iranian terrorist regime is being absolutely crushed. 47 years of tolerating and enabling the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism are over.
Axios, I think, was the first to report this morning this phone call between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that Netanyahu had given the U.S. this information about where the Ayatollah would be and that he'd be with his deputies on Saturday. How important was that information in the president making the decision to strike where and when he did?
I think it was important with respect to the timeline, but I think the president, prior to that phone call, had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets and our personnel in the region. And the president was faced with a choice. Does the United States of America use our military and our capabilities to strike first, to take out this threat that has been threatening our country and our people for 47 years, or is he going to, as commander-in-chief, sit back and watch as the rogue Iranian regime attacks our people in the region? That's obviously an unacceptable decision. For the second choice there is unacceptable to the president, which is why he made this decision. As for where the Ayatollah was going to be, that obviously had an impact on the timeline of the operation, but not quite the president's decision in its entirety.
And then on the way the public is viewing this, we were sitting here last week, I asked you if the president was going to make this a big part of the State of the Union, if he felt like he had to sell the possibility that he'd do strikes like this. We're now 5 days on. He hasn't done kind of the traditional speech to the nation part of it. Does the president believe the country supports the actions that he's taken so far in Iran?
I think he does, and I think the president knows the country is smart enough to read past many of the fake news headlines produced by people in this room that this action was unjustifiable. Again, this is a rogue terrorist regime that has been threatening the United States, our allies, and our people for 47 years. And the American people are smart enough to know that. And they've also been smart enough to listen to the president himself, not just over the past year in this second term, but during his first term as president, and also for the past 40 years of his life. This is a president who has been remarkably consistent on this issue, that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And the president tried peace through diplomacy, exhaustively and extensively. He and his team gave it their best go, and the president ultimately came to the determination of that peace was not a pursuable path. The Iranian regime, they want death, they want destruction, they want to kill Americans, and that's unacceptable to this president. It's intolerable to him as commander-in-chief. Jackie. The president of the United States or the commander-in-chief, and he wisely does not do the same for himself. I know there's many leaders in the past who like to take options off of the table. To the first question, I completely reject the premise of your question. You have had the President of the United States, the Secretary of War, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and now I am out here today to explain to you exactly what led the President to make the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury. And President Trump does not make these decisions in a vacuum. This decision to launch this operation was based on a cumulative effect of various direct threats that Iran posed to the United States of America, and the president's feeling based on fact that Iran does pose an imminent and direct threat to the United States of America based on the fact. And the president has said them in his speech when he launched this operation and released that video in the middle of the night to all of you and to the world.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.